By the way, the Labor Day is celebrated in the US and Canada as well, but it's not May 1st, but the first Monday of September. However, for the Kiev regime, it is of no importance because they rewrite a history by their own whims. As they desire to rewrite the history, the Kiev regime is ready to do anything. It needs to recode the mindset of millions of Ukrainians and those who associate themselves with this country to impose the idea of national exceptionality and dominance, not identity. What kind of identity can we talk about if everything that was cherished by the Ukrainian people was trampled during this political fight and mayhem? In order to govern the zombies, since it is much easier for Zelensky to do than to deal with what he promised to do everything for the benefit of the Ukrainian people and to preserve the genuine identity of its people. Basically, everything that I was telling you about, that's one way of putting it, but this is the true colors of the Ukrainian democracy. Here we see the influence of Washington. The workers' rights, just like human rights in Ukraine, have turned to nothing, are just empty words in Ukraine. By way of celebrating May 1st, Zelensky was much closer to the West than he imagined, especially now. Well, that's just broad strokes, and let's move on to the crux of the matter. By doing so, Donetsk suffers enormously. It had the lion's share of suffering throughout the 9 years of the Kiev aggression against the Russian-speaking population of Donbas. We get daily reports regarding the atrocities against women, children, elderly. We see the loss of life by men as well, by those who defend Donbas. But that gives you an idea about the Kiev regime. They don't make any difference between women and men. And it's not because they value the human life. It's because they don't care a bit about the life. People are being killed in the heart of the city. Ukrainian nationalists made a missile attack against the capital of the DPR using American HIMARS systems. A missile struck a minivan, killing 7 people, including children. Where's the Western response? Have you seen any? Do you remember that their humanism was symbolized by the picture of a Syrian boy, photos and footage of children that suffered in Syria? They were circulated widely in Paris, London, Berlin. They were part of the election campaign, the rhetoric of politics in the EU political landscape. And now, after that, it turned out that this was just hypocrisy. But here, children died, and that is a fact. Has anybody heard any response? Maybe we just missed any debates in the British Parliament. Maybe the British Prime Minister came to his Parliament and made a briefing on the life of the children that were killed by the Kiev regime sponsored by the UK. Not at all. They just cynically stated that they have been supplying depleted uranium projectiles to the Kiev regime, as if it were some kind of humanitarian assistance. As for reporting, they never gave any report or accountability. 10 persons were also wounded in the Republican Injury Center. Maybe France briefed you about that, or some international associations bringing together investigative journalists or journalists per se. Not at all, not in the slightest. The Ukrainian armed forces are not shy to use violent ways of destroying civilians using mines. Donetsk recently saw the explosion of 4 kids. 2 of them were seriously wounded. Spain, Portugal, Italy. Has anyone known about that? All media outlets are simply banned from seeing that, hearing that, learning about that. Northern Europe, that loves so much to feel compassion to the victims of conflicts, to issue them residence permits, to give them prizes and awards. Are these kids not worthy of prizes? They do not care about prizes, they just want to survive, as was the case over the past 8 years. But that's a different story. That is of no interest to anyone. That doesn't fit the picture that is painted by mainstream media using Washington, by the Washington's instruction. And it is all happening amid constant sessions in Washington, New York, Geneva, at various international platforms. I'm talking about events on the freedom of media, journalists' rights, fight against fake news and impartiality in media outlets. What kind of impartiality and freedom of speech can we talk about if nobody talks about that except for us? Regrettably, if you think that we do not give these materials to sectoral institutions, to special envoys, to offices of high commissioners in international organizations, to the international organizations per se, that is also wrong, because we provide these materials on a daily basis to wake up the international community. And here I'm talking about the West primarily, because they are dreaming constantly, except for some kind of illusions that are built by mainstream media. There's nothing else. There's no word of truth. In Asia, in Africa, in Latin America, there are still alternative journalists who were not victims of Western pressure against this collective information space. You can still hear and see something there, let alone the post-Soviet space, although it provides not a homogeneous coverage, but still the voice of truth is still heard somewhere. If we talk about the CIS countries, we brief our partners virtually on a daily basis. The CIS, the CSTO, are the integration associations. All this data are emerging every day. We include it in reports. At some point in time, they should reach this dormant conscience that still exists. Terrorist activities and subversion continue to gain ground. On the 29th of April, there's been an attack of the Ukrainian drone against an oil storage tank in the Kazacha Bay in Sevastopol. It caused fire. Representative of the Ukrainian MOD, Yusuf, basically confirmed the participation of the Kiev regime in this crime, and he claimed that there will still be ongoing strikes, as if Crimea is not populated at all. It is not inhabited. It is just a test range to implement these ill whims of the Kiev regime. But it is inhabited. It has civilians. Children go to schools. People are working there. Back in the day, they ran away from the Kiev regime because they realized how it will all end up and who will gain the upper hand at the Bankovo Street. But now the Kiev regime does not conceal that they wanted to raise to the ground everything that is not part of their picture, that is not part of their worldview. By the way, representative of the Chief Intelligence Office of the MOD, Yusuf, advised locals not to be near military facilities that ensure the interests of the Russian army. That's an interesting way of putting it. On the 1st of May, in the Gatineau region of the Leningrad region, the power grid was damaged. The second explosive device was deactivated. The cargo freight train was also went off the rail. Luckily, there were no casualties among Belarus brigade of engine drivers. Let me also highlight that today, at the level of our agencies, some additional clarifications were provided on Sevastopol, and we will definitely provide you with the relevant links. This provided the new detailed materials, information, and data on the subversion activities by the armed forces of Ukraine regarding Sevastopol.
We draw attention to an attempt by the Kiev regime to pass the responsibility for the clumsy work of its air defense system, because one of the Ukrainian missiles hit a residential house and caused the death of 17 people. It is not the first time such a tragedy happens, but the Ukrainian authorities and the Kiev regime try to behave as if the Ukrainian authorities are a terrorist regime, and their activities are also terrorist. And at the bunker, they lie to their compatriots, and they invent things. They also use these events for propaganda purposes. We can also cite the mentioned cynical attack of the Ukrainian forces. They caused it the God's punishment for human. It is regarding the fight not connected with the special military operation, but just destroying the canonical Orthodox Church for many years, taking measures against priests and against worshippers, also questioning morals and the commandments of Christ as well, of course. And nothing sacred remains for them. It has become obvious after the tragedy in Odessa, because those people who really have memory, who really have conscience, and who really have soul, they remember the victims of the trade union house in Odessa. Have you heard anything from the Kiev regime with regard to that? Maybe somewhere in the international organizations something has been said, something has been done. Maybe there were calls to fight those who are guilty of that tragedy, because every day there are technogenic tragedies in the world, unfortunately the cases of extremism, catastrophes of all kinds that take a lot of lives. But even among those tragedies, there are unique ones, not taking into account the number of victims, but the lack of humanity of those who have committed that, and who has either admitted that, consented to that, or confirmed the actions of those who acted against moral values. Nothing, no analytical reviews exist for that. It is not a PR campaign named Bucha. Those were real events in the Union House in Odessa. And what has happened since that tragedy? What has been said here in international organizations and at symposiums and international seminars? The Russian side has repeated and has explained where that logic leads. And that is the result. Absolute impunity, absolute lack of moral values with regard to all the spheres of life, with the leadership of the Kiev regime, has created terrible things with that country that we observe now. Western countries do not conceal their participation in the preparation of the so-called counter-offensive of the Ukrainian armed forces. They have already shipped the munitions for more than 600 million euro, and they plan to for this value to reach 1 billion euro. The German Minister of Defense, Boris Pistorius, announced the shipments of 80 Leopard 1 tanks, and in the nearest time the Germans will begin to train more than 100 Ukrainian servicemen to handle them, and it is obvious who will be the target of this equipment. It is not the issue of training, of experience exchange. It's about annihilation of people in the conflict zone. But who is thinking about that in Germany in such categories? Moreover, 31 American Abrams tanks are expected in Bavaria, and there will be a course for Ukrainian servicemen as well. More than 1,000 fighters of Ukrainian Special Forces services are being actively trained. And a counselor to the Ukrainian president, Mr. Pedalak, threatened measures to his compatriots in case they voluntarily receive the citizenship of the Russian Federation. And as a result, they will be the target of the Ukrainian forces. Does it concern only passport? I have a question to this Mr. Podolak. Is it only the question of passport? And if at Bankovo they find some real estate or business in the Russian Federation, will there be any investigation? Why does this segregation take place? Why can a person for the passport, why should he be punished? Maybe he has nothing else in his life. But those who have multi-billion businesses and profits from real estate, but now they are the leaders of the Kiev regime, why there will be no measures taken against them? Only because they have a lot of money? No, if there is no humanity, so take those measures if you are not ready. I address now the Kiev regime. If you are not ready to go back to the traditional values, normal values, if this process is irreversible for you, be consistent and provide information where you have those hidden assets, as if no one knows about that, because you are taking measures against people who are surviving, who experienced the Western experiments on the territory of Ukraine. Now you are taking measures against them. I'm not speaking about high-scale politics. I'm talking about survival of many people. Maybe Mr. Podolak was unable to understand why the residents of Crimea the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republic, the Zaporozhye and Kherson regions decided to become part of Russia with their historic motherlands because they do not want to stay with those who do not value their right to live. And they want to receive the passport of the country, maybe where they were born, where they have relative ties. And the Kiev regime refusing them this possibility to receive the passport. And regarding those who have passports and residential permits of Great Britain, of Germany, possibilities to stay there for a long period, guarantees provided by those countries, Germany, Great Britain, the USA, Canada, Israel. And those people forbid to their citizens to have the possibility to choose. Why? Why is it happening? The events in Ukraine for the next time prove the timely manner of the Russian special military operation. As the Russian leaders have stated, the tasks and the aims will be reached. And those experiments by the Kiev regime, they have nothing new. It's not just Nazism, it's neo-Nazism. It's the reincarnation of the practices of the recent past. I would like to tell you about the book day in Germany. What is the book day for any normal person, any contemporary person who goes to libraries now, visits online libraries where it is based on the knowledge of history and the main element. What is the book day? It's admitting the role of our civilization, of passing our heritage and so on. There are events in libraries, in scientific centers, at universities, at schools, speeches and editions of some special books, special materials. Now it has passed to a new technological base, flash mobs, hashtags and so on. So what's the book day in Germany? Because when we celebrate Victory Day, we often forget the Black Day in German history. Just 90 years ago, on the 9th of May 1933, at the Opernplatz Square, now it is Bebelplatz in Berlin, and some other German cities, a barbaric act of burning by the National Socialists, mostly young people and students, of books unfavorable to the Hitler regimes. It was a barbaric and Nazi act. It had been planned beforehand by the Ministry of Propaganda, initiated by Goebbels. I would like to remind you, he was a philologist, a German philologist. He had that education, and that act became the highest point of the campaign organized by the Nazis to fight the literature not in accordance with the German spirit. Does it remind you of anything? Is there a prohibition to import the books to Ukraine? And the books covered are also children literature and cooking books. Everything possible was prohibited. So 90 years ago, more than 25,000 books by foreign and German authors were destroyed in one day, including humanist philosophers' books. And during the Nazi reign, the destroyed books amounted to billions of copies. And it was national pride, the issue of national pride. It was applauded by millions. They thought that it is what should be done. And now the same things happen. The more absurd, the wilder what is down at the Bankovo by the Kiev regime, the more they become convinced of the righteousness of their actions, and the more terrible the picture of their barbaric acts becomes, the more unique they consider themselves, and convinced of their rightfulness, starting from lawful acts and moral things. So 90 years ago, the burning of books became followed the prophecy of Heinrich Heine, who wrote that the burning of humanistic books would be followed by the mass burnings of people. And that is what is happening in Ukraine. And the circumstances are even more terrible, because in many aspects the Nazi Germany committed what before for hundreds of years there were no attempts to do. And the Kiev regime is acting with the understanding that the Nuremberg process had happened. And fascism and Nazism were condemned. But still the Kiev regime is repeating that and the German people had to repent for their barbaric acts, including the fight against literature and books. And there is a monument that in Berlin that reminds us of that. These are empty bookshelves and that are closed above by glass. And if someone in Germany can tell now that the monument has no artistic value and proposes to demolish it, he will be accused in Germany, ostracized, and so on. And if the same thing is happening on the territory of Ukraine, where Germany ships tanks, and the trained so-called experts who are actually militants with Ukrainian and other passports, that is what has been happening in Ukraine for decades. What is the reason of such colossal duplication of conscience in Western countries? Because beyond the black page of its history, they have erected the monuments, but they continue to bear moral responsibility. They protect those monuments. And if someone just has an idea to split paint or to write something on that monument, to desecrate it, that person would be found and would be punished by prison term. And his name will be published in the whole country, in schools, universities and other public organizations. There will be lessons of inappropriate behavior, of the results of such destructive logics. But in other countries, sponsored by Germany, in many senses of that world, and from the point of view of Germany, never noticed in bringing to responsibility such people, has never condemned people in the countries where the monuments to the heroes of the great of the Second World War, the Great Patriotic War, were destroyed. And such countries are just near Germany. I would like to remind you, these are Poland, the Czech Republic, Bulgaria, the Baltic states, and of course Ukraine. It is a flagrant example. A terrible lessons of history was not learned by everyone back then, because the neo-Nazis in today Ukraine are just repeating those actions.
Basically, Kiev wanted to excel Nazi Germany, at least when it comes to the scale and scope of this campaign. The Ukrainian authorities proudly state that several dozen millions of volumes are destroyed. The majority are written in Russian. First, they were proud about that, then they bore responsibility for that, then they were ostracized for several decades. But initially, they were proud of themselves. They believed that that is an exceptional mission. There's no system whatsoever. They just deliberately destroy everything in Russian, including Ukrainian classical authors, their translation into Russian. That's what they decided to do, but that all started more than a year ago. Have you forgotten actions, quotas for radio and TV broadcasting on the use of the Russian language? Only think about that. People who say some things about human rights, freedom of speech, rights of national minorities, they couldn't even imagine that in the heart of the so-called civilized life, civilized Europe, there are states, and there is a state that could impose quotas for the use of a language, not to have a positive discrimination, that is, to get an opportunity to ensure the minimum quota and to boost the use of the languages of national minorities. But Russians are not national minorities in Ukraine. That is absurd. Nevertheless, there is such a term. Nobody couldn't imagine that quotas would be imposed on the language that is spoken there for many centuries. We have seen it for the past several decades, for the past several years. Now they just burned several dozens of millions of volumes, as they put it. The well-known Russian classical authors are banned from Ukrainian school curriculum. Pushkin, Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, Turgenev. Once again, it confirms the prophecy by Heinrich Heine, with the simple difference that neo-nationalists in Ukraine initially started burning people 9 years ago. It happened on the 2nd of May 2014 in the trade union house in Odessa. We have no doubt that there would be an end to this mayhem in Kiev, and those who took hostage Ukraine and trying to change the identity of Ukraine using Goebbels' methods to separate this identity from people who have a shared future and past. These plans are doomed to failure, and certainly today we will highlight the Nord Stream situation, Nord Stream 1, Nord Stream 2, the extremist acts, the acts of terrorism, subversion, the different names to that. There is an ongoing investigation. Nevertheless, the countries that face such attacks, and allegedly they spoke about their own infrastructure, they put it in these terms. We continue to closely monitor the developments around the investigation of Nord Stream explosions that happened in September 2022. The culprits are yet to be identified, including due to the fact that Germany, Denmark, Sweden that carry out national investigation have no political will to ensure their transparency. We have repeatedly stated that it is impossible to ensure transparency without bringing on board Russian agencies and Gazprom. Let me recall that Russia made several requests. The letter of Mishustin, dated October the 5th, 2022, and the notes of the Russian Foreign Ministry were left without any substantive response. And this is demonstrated by the response by the Foreign Ministry of Sweden that we received late April this year. We provided a note urging to provide information on the circumstances of the terrorist attack and to investigate comprehensively the subversions, engaging Russian experts. And this time the Swedish side gave a formal reply limiting itself to the reference to a former correspondence. That is just a vicious cycle. Instead of a dialogue, we see the theater of absurd that is repeating itself time and again. There's no meaningful dialogue, let alone engaging in investigation and studying of the situation with the states that declared this investigation. They are doing everything to make this investigation non-transparent. At the same time, there is some news. Media outlets in these countries, primarily I'm talking about Germany, Denmark and Sweden, but also other media outlets from other NATO countries, they're actively supporting them, clearly following the instructions of military and security services. They spread groundless Russophobic innuendo, and there is something new to that. Namely, lately there's been information by the Information. This is a Danish newspaper that claims that 4 days prior to the incident there was a Russian warship near the explosion area. Allegedly, it could carry equipment including mini-submarine to conduct special operations at the seabed. It claims that the Danish security special services, they were silent before that, but 6 months have passed. So allegedly, the Danish security services have some pictures of a Russian warship. Well, it is reasonable for any journalist to state, and for any rank-and-file citizen, for any reader, is to say, can we look at it? Can we have a look? This footage cannot be made public to by the armed forces of Denmark, and you know why? Well, that is not funny. Already, the Danish security services will not make these pictures public. That is the basis for this conspiracy theory, because they are sensitive. You know what? That is the follow-up to a famous cartoon. Clearly, such bogus stories do not seek to establish the truth. They just want to make the situation harder. They just have one goal in mind, to make it seem that the investigation is ongoing. That's one thing. And secondly, the competent authorities, although we have doubts regarding their competence, that these authorities are still working. A great deal of money has been invested in these projects. There are costs, long-term, short-term costs to everybody that were engaged in these projects, and third countries as well. And third, to create some alternative versions and to divert the attention of everyone. And that is the main goal behind this smear campaign. Let me dispel this speculation of NATO non-partners. The information is made public, and it is odd that the journalists, as well as the Danish military, do not know about this. But I can brief you. From the 19th to the 24th of September 2022, the Baltic Fleet had practical exercises at the training ranges of the Baltic Sea, as it was previously planned. The forces and equipment of the Baltic Fleet that were engaged in this exercise, planned exercise, could not be located in the area of a supposed terrorist attack at the major gas pipeline, Nord Stream 2, since the combat training grounds are too far away from this area. We should bear in mind that there are facts, there are data, and there is a gap in education, enormous gap in education. You do remember Foreign Minister of Germany stating that there are some countries that are located hundreds of thousands of kilometers away from each other. There are no such countries. Well, of course, there are some countries of this sort, but you need to make several rounds across Earth. That would make you several hundred thousands of kilometers. There's data, facts, logic, a lot of computer programs, special apps that could calculate it. And all this information is made public. It is widely accessible. At the same time, there's this gap. Maybe that is a difficult thing for Western partners to understand. There's this gap in education that allow Western media to give this information to their readership. For all this time, the Baltic Sea Fleet was carrying out its maritime training exercises. At the same time, when we talk about the area of the supposed explosion, it is located in the exceptional exclusive economic zone of Denmark that by definition rules out any activities and actions of the Baltic Fleet in line with UNCLOS. And certainly, Western media publish new version, breaking news version regarding Russia's involvement in the explosion of Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline 6 months after this incident, which is clearly evidence of the smear campaign by the West to rule out genuine perpetrators. Those experts in Denmark, Sweden, other countries publishing these materials, and it would be more reasonable to ask this question to the authorities of this country. Over the past 6 months, is it the first time on May and April 2023, is it the first time that you have heard about the planned exercises of the Russian Black Sea Fleet? And before that, was it the kind of information that was not accessible to you? And local journalists should have asked a question to the local authorities. Why do you get your salary since you have not noticed these obvious facts that were made public? That's not only a question to local authorities, but it is also a question to journalists who just copy-paste everything and do not ask basic questions. Let's move on. And it has to do with May 1st, by the way. Everybody has been following mass rallies in France against the pension reform promoted by the government. It prompted quite a contradictory response in the society. This is a kind of a domestic affair in France, but we'd like to highlight something. The decision of the government to use its constitutional right to adopt a law without a vote in the parliament only triggered protests. And in this electric atmosphere, the traditional manifestation of May the 1st resulted in mayhem, in arsons, vandalism and looting in key French cities, including Paris. For their part, police officers were quite violent. There were hundreds of detainees and injured, including law enforcers. You have all seen it. Frankly speaking, after everything I saw, I get a question. If people from various parts of the state behave in such a way with regard to their own citizens, and at the same time they are not in a state of civil war, we're talking about peaceful situation, peaceful manifestation on May 1st, can this state have a right to be a beacon of human rights, or say humanitarian rights and freedoms? Can it lecture anybody else? Has it reached the relevant level of harmonization of political, public, civil processes in this country before lecturing everybody else? Without any intention to interfere into domestic affairs of France, let me highlight this specifically, that is not the tradition of Russian diplomacy. A question begs itself. Amid such dire social and political standoff and basic split in the French society, how justified are regular lectures by officials in Paris regarding various sovereign states? I'm not only talking about Russia, although publicly and in social networks and international organizations, Paris is trying to lecture us, to teach us something. Every state has its own path for development, its historical process, and every state has its crisis situations. It overcomes it judging by its national interests, traditions, and peculiarities. It should be respected, and for it to be respected, it needs to be understood. You need to start from the beginning. Shouldn't the French authorities be more focused on multiple problems and not to turn to others, searching for violations of human rights and the so-called authoritarian trends and other flaws? You should better focus on yourself. And a couple of topics that have to do with humanitarian situation. Last week, the capital of the Laos People's Democratic Republic successfully had the Russian Film Festival. It was organized by Voskino, Ministry of Culture of Russia, the Russian Embassy. The event showed Russian films and cartoons with Laos subtitles. The opening ceremony was attended by leadership of the National Council of the Lao DPR, the Ministry of Information, Culture and Tourism, other Lao agencies and organizations. They highlighted in their remarks that a chance to study Russian cinemas allows the new generation of Lao citizens not only to get an idea of new areas of development of modern cinema industry, but also to get a glimpse of the spirit and nature of Russians that are no strangers to the graduates of Soviet universities that today are high-ranking officials in Laos. The event was broadly covered by mass media. The Lao audience was interested in Russian cinemas, and it was showcased by a full house during the cinema screening. The organization of this Russian Film Festival proved that our cinema and our culture is highly relevant and important, and it also showcased significant prospects for the development of bilateral cooperation. On the 25th of April, Douala in the Republic of Cameroon saw the opening of the Russian Education Center with the support of the Education Ministry of Russia. On the first day of the work of the center saw the opening of Russian language courses that had over 100 students registered. During the upcoming fortnight, there would be an in-person courses for the students. They are to pass a Russian language test, and for those who already studied the Russian language, they will have a chance to pass a basic test. The course is very intensive. It uses cutting-edge ethnic-guided communication methods for foreigners outside the language environment. Teachers of the center also implement special program for Russian as a foreign language for those who study in the Russian International School Galactica. The program is aimed at elementary and junior high students. The project is implemented within the Education Ministry program with the support of to support Russian language abroad. It seeks to develop and preserve win-win humanitarian cooperation between Russia and African countries.
And recently in Moscow, from the 25th to 27th of April, the International Assembly of the International Military Sports Council took place in Moscow. It unites 140 countries and is among the largest sports organizations. Around 80 states were participants, 50 representatives came to Moscow, and around 30 were connected online from Brussels, where the headquarters of the organization is situated. It is a good example of how interaction free from some external influence should be carried out. The Council did not impose restrictions in accordance with the ROC recommendations against Russian and Belarusian athletes, and they can take part in competitions with their flag and their hymn. And it is an example that a positive sign that common sense and impartiality still remain in national sports, in the interests not of someone's interests, but in the interests of international sports. There is friendship, there is a motto of friendship through sports, and it remains an instrument of strengthening interpersonal connections, rapprochement, and unification of different peoples of the world. And there is hope that the remaining sports sphere will soon be purified of the interests imposed by some countries. And now the announcement from the 25th to the 27th of May in the city of Sibay, in the Trans-Urals, the Sabantui get-together on investment will take place. Relevant issues on the development of economy of the Republic of Bashkortostan and Russia will be discussed. The organizer is the government of the Republic of Bashkortostan. More than 1,000 participants take part in the forum, including representatives of Belarus, Uzbekistan, and other countries. The Trans-Urals Sabantui was attended by more than 1.5 thousand participants from 61 territorial entities of Russia and other countries, and more than 20 agreements amounting to 107 billion rubles were signed. The Forum of Business Sheriffs is also planned within the framework of this Sabantui. And the plenary session, powerhouse regions of the growth economy is planned. And among the topics discussed will be Islamic bank investment, localization of Chinese enterprises, the development of partner relations, the development of tourism, cooperation of the republics of Bashkortostan and the Republic of Kazakhstan, the issues of logistics and redistribution of cargo flows, and many other issues. The partners are the Committee on the Financial Markets of the State Duma of the Russian Federation, the Trade and Industry Chamber of the Russian Federation, InfraWeb, joint stock company, Delovaya Rossiya, joint stock companies, the Diplomatic Academy of the Russian Foreign Ministry, the Interagency Analytical Center, and the RBC Multimedia Holding, among others. So we advise media representatives to take part in the coverage of this event. Now, the last but not the least, the holiday of our people that I'm sure will last for eternity, will last in our memory. In the run-up to the 78th anniversary of the victory in the Great Patriotic War, the embassies, the consulates general and territorial entities of the ministry take active part in thematic ceremonial events. We continue our coverage in social media regarding the role our country played in liberating Europe from Nazism. In studying the history of that time, we go along that difficult way with our heroic ancestors. Among the participants are diplomats in many countries of the world. Despite unfavorable, so to say, and sometimes aggressive external factors, they hold memorial events, including the ceremony, the Gardens of Memory, and the event, the Windows of Victory. They also lay wreaths to monuments to Soviet soldiers. In the ministry itself, on the 5th of May, ceremonies will take place. Flowers will be laid to memorials in the hall of the ministry. Then the delegation of the ministry, headed by a deputy minister, will lay a wreath to the grave of the unknown soldier near the Kremlin wall. There will be a ceremonial meeting dedicated to that date in our ministry, with the administrations of the territorial entities. The staff members of the ministry will take part in other cities in Russia. The ceremony, the Garden of Memory, will cover many cities, and many trees will be planted. In St. Petersburg, trees were planted in the park near the Peskarova Memorial Cemetery. In Yekaterinburg, the book was presented, The Garden of Victory, The Philosophy of Courage and Persistence. On the 2nd of May, there will be a concert dedicated to the holiday. On the 9th of May, there will be the ceremony of laying the wreaths and flowers on the territory of the Shirokorechinsk Memorial Complex in Vladivostok. Flowers will be laid to the memorial to the military glory of the Pacific Fleet. There will be such ceremonies as the Georgian ribbon, the Candle of Memory, and the Minute of Silence. And representatives of friendly consulates were invited to take part in the ceremonies. They will also be covered in our media accounts, in our social networks and not our social networks. So we invite everyone who is interested to follow our accounts, the account of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the central headquarters, and the representations in the regions of our country. So I'm ready to answer your questions. Is международная жизнь with us? Yes, hello, Mrs. Zakharova. Recently, a French journalist, Xavier Offay, in his article for Atlantico, wrote that in Eastern Europe, the level of crime due to illegal flow of arms from Ukraine, the level of crime increased, and this process, ignored by the army and the media, will be continuous and dangerous. And according to him, it is of little concern to the Washington strategists. How can you comment on his statements? So, thank you very much for citing the French authors, journalists, but frankly speaking, I would prefer you to cite us as well, because I would like to say that this topic, where the weapons with ammunitions will go and where they will appear, we have dealt on this issue for more than a year, in a practical aspect, in different aspects. But for a year, we are talking directly about what is happening and what will happen in short term. And what we have told, and we spoke about that daily. We will give a link in the context of this briefing to that material. Everything mentioned by us came true, but not everyone in the West wants to see that. It's obvious why Washington does not want to see that, because it's part of their strategy to destabilize the situation on the European continent. The officials and the representatives of the leading parties do not want to see that. They have the relevant information in the European Union countries, it's not clear. But I think that the answer is the same because part of them are puppies of the Washington of their strategies. And regarding all types of munitions of weapons and regarding heavy weapons, although it is paradoxical, it has already appeared on the European markets, on black markets of weapons. What are the black weapons markets? It's not some land of miracles. You understand that because maybe it can be called like that, but it's not some closed area where the situation can be controlled. The black market, talking about weapons, it's everywhere, taking into account the internet factor. It's a possibility to buy through blockchain technologies not controlled by any governments or special services through some information chains in the internet. I would like to repeat, any types of weapons supplied by Western countries to the Kiev regime. You understand? Organized crime, drug trafficking, pillages, and shipments to other regions of the world. Something remains on the European Union territory, something goes further. They appear to have an illusion that something remains, something goes by transit, and this transit part will not concern them. And they lived in that illusion when they created the Arab Spring, when destroyed Libya, tried to occupy Syria. They were in that illusion, and then they had to wake up when tens, hundreds of thousands, millions of migrants came to them with their problems and woke them up. And back then, they had to go to reality from some illusionary world. And we were talking about that constantly, including the briefings on the 23rd of January in the 2023 and other briefings. We dealt on that situation. Now I would repeat what has been said, but I will repeat that. The uncontrolled pumping up of Ukraine with arms by the Western countries provokes increase in criminogenic situation not only in Europe but also in the world. It happened from February 2014 to December 2021, but then the speed increased and the scale increased. Before the special military operation, the Kiev authorities got around $70.5 billion in military aid. I would like to highlight it was before the special military operation. So in less than 10 years, for 6 years, more than $70 billion had already been allocated to the Kiev regime as military assistance. Although the control, as the experts say, was extremely weak, but there was actually no control. Because regarding the EU, the US, at some point there was lack of patience regarding the corruption schemes at the Bankovaya in Ukraine and the affiliated structure. They demanded investigations, materials were published, some people were fired, there were persecutions and so on. But that was not covering the substantial schemes, criminal schemes, because it's some united chain. From Ukraine, the lethal arms migrated to other unstable regions of the world. During the period of the Russian special military operations, the volume of military aid have become unprecedented. The number of American and other Western arms exceeded those shipped for the 10 years of the war in Afghanistan to the Mujahideens. And such irresponsible mass distribution leads to their passing to the arms of terrorists and to criminals. But will they go to the external regions of the world? They have different tasks, and the trade goes on with the use of cryptocurrencies, and the consumers become terrorists and criminals. It would be a powerful catalyzer of sharing the criminal spheres of influence and mafia wars, where the new criminal groups will take place. But if someone has illusions that it will remain there, it is some closed by a fence, area closed by a fence. If you are someone who obeys the law, you cannot get there. It's an illusion. It's a mistake. I would say that it's a crime to consider that. And to communicate that information to your population. By getting the weapons, the criminals, the terrorists and the extremists use them not against each other, but against civilians, against the state as well. They're selling at the black markets. The selling of the supplied weapons is not of such concern to the West, to the collective West. The major beneficiary of the crisis is the American military industry that is trying to gain the commercial profit despite everything. It could be of unprecedented scales, particularly if they get the weapons, the munitions, and if it is the portable anti-aircraft missile systems like Stinger or anti-tank missile system Javelin, you could imagine the scale and the consequences. But the West, as you understand, it was Marx who wrote that there are profits after which moral values cease to exist. It's not about moral values here. Firstly, it's about common sense, and secondly, it's about common sense in the consensus of someone's own security and prosperity. But after some sums of money, some feelings just stop to exist. Is Ria Novosti with us? Yes. Hello, Ms. Zakharova. We have a question. Today, the Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu said that the meeting of the heads of foreign ministries of Turkey and Iran is planned for the 10th of May in Moscow. Can you confirm this information? Well, firstly, the working contracts of the parties in the Joint Coordination Center in Istanbul are going on constantly. It is these are regular contacts adhering to the rules of procedure. And the summit meeting is discussed, but the terms have not yet been agreed. As soon as they are agreed, I promise, we will inform everyone of that. But only today, in the media, there were 2 dates cited in the media. Please be patient. It's not the issue of reprinting or frequently asking questions. It's not the case. As soon as the date and the format are agreed, we will confirm it as soon as possible. And our estimations of the Black Sea Initiative regarding the Russian agricultural products and fertilizers reaching the global market. Our estimations are well known, and Minister Sergei Lavrov spoke about that in detail during his stay in New York and his meeting with the Secretary General in the press conference.
On May 1st, Moscow will host another round of consultations on the implementation of the MOU between Russia and the UN. It will be headed by UNCTAD Secretary General Rebecca Greenspan. Frankly speaking, as of now, this is an exhaustive answer. The thing is that I had a question not on the grain deal, but on the meeting between foreign ministers of Russia, Turkey, Syria, and Iran. I misheard you, I believe. Okay. What was the question? According to some media reports, Mevlut Çavuşoğlu announced today that a meeting of ministers of Russia, Syria, Iran, and Turkey is scheduled for May 10th in Moscow. Would like to know whether that's true. Okay, I would clarify that and I would respond to you quickly, maybe during the briefing. Let's move on. Next question. The Moscow Post. Are you here with us? Hello, we have 3 questions. First, there was an attack on Russian Center for Science and Culture on Cyprus, and there was a ban by Polish air company of a Russian tennis player. Last year, there was a report on violations of human rights of Russian compatriots abroad. What is the situation as of now, and what should be done to confront discrimination and threats? That's a pretty comprehensive question. Let me answer on a case-by-case basis. First, today we'll have a Cyprus ambassador in the foreign ministry who will be provided with the guarantees for security of Russian employees in Cyprus. With regard to the general situation that you have outlined, since the launch of the special military operation, it's been an unprecedented, unlawful, Russophobic campaign by the Western states. The situation is not improving. Unfortunately, it is even getting worse. There are victims among not only Russians, but also every Russian-speaking persons, especially I would like to highlight Lithuania, Latvia, and Poland. But he would like to make a reservation. This campaign was developed in the heart of the NATO bloc, but it is spreading due to various reasons via various channels, and it has spilled over other countries that are not unfriendly, and unfortunately to countries where we enjoy allied relations. But following this Russophobic campaign, we see situations regarding our missions abroad and our compatriots. We do understand that the authorities of these countries are investigating these cases, but currently we are talking about this sentiment that was nurtured by Washington, London, Brussels, and it is spreading in a destructive manner worldwide. Suffice it to recall an outrageous case of Polish actions regarding Russian school in Warsaw. It violates all the commitments under the diplomatic conventions. You have heard our response. You've heard that the Polish ambassador was summoned to the foreign ministry. As for the countermeasures taken by Russia, we will brief you certainly in due time. There was also firing abuse of medical services, and there are insults, offenses, treatment, abuse of property. Information on all such cases is being carefully reported, and it is reflected in the relevant reports by our Foreign Ministry, including the annual report that you have mentioned. We are considering the relevant countermeasures. They are different when it comes to violation of human rights of Russians. The consulates and foreign embassies are dealing with that. The Russian foreign ministries have hotlines, they have phone lines, they are considering and studying various requests, and although we have limited resources in a number of unfriendly states, diplomats are considering such human rights tasks as their priority. In this regard, following such requests, we are working with local authorities, primarily at the level of foreign ministry, but also with law enforcers. We draw the attention to discrimination of international organizations, human rights organizations. We actively use the UN platform, the OSCE, as we draw the attention of the international community to the infringement of human rights among Russians. These illegal actions, these steps, these campaigns, this Russophobic campaign flagrantly violate commitments of these states under key documents when it comes to human rights and freedoms, including the Universal Human Rights Convention, international covenants regarding racial discrimination, and other international treaties and conventions. We urge Western countries to immediately stop bullying everything Russian, to return to bona fide implementation of their obligations in human rights, including when it comes to fighting discrimination. They should do that not to us, but also to their own people. They should abide by the commitments enshrined in their national law and international law. They have not banned it, thus they need to implement it. Political situation or political structures should not allow them not to implement their direct obligations and commitments. The head of our missions brief our compatriots on the relevant mechanisms for promoting their human rights. We also make requests to the United Nations platform, and we use the special procedures including the special rapporteurs of the Human Rights Council on modern forms of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, zero tolerance when it comes to national minorities, and a lack of freedom of expression. Within the Human Rights Commissioner of Russia, together with our embassies abroad, we are updating constantly the database of legal experts and law firms that are ready to provide services to people abroad that found themselves in a difficult situation. Human rights activities are also conducted, among other things, by the Fund for Supporting Compatriots Abroad. There are law enforcement and human rights institutions in embassies in various countries. There are thousands of free of charge legal consultations. There are requests to human rights organizations. Also would like to highlight that there's the work aimed at fighting discrimination of Russians abroad. It is a comprehensive effort, and not only the Foreign Ministry is engaged in this effort, but also a number of other agencies and public institutions. You see that our investigative committee is working seamlessly in a well-calibrated way. So, at some point in time, we needed to have an official request, a transfer of information, materials, and so on. But currently, we are working with the investigative committee shoulder to shoulder on a broad range of the topics that I've mentioned, cases of violations with regard to Russians abroad, with regard to our missions abroad, and so on and so forth. As you know, the result depends not only on our work as the foreign ministry and as our missions, but also it depends on other things. You are well aware of the developments in the collective West, because we're talking about a well-planned political campaign that seeks to discredit everything Russian, dealing damage to everything that has to do with our country, people, and culture. We have to state that in Europe, local authorities have just responded to Russian requests in a formal way. And I'm not only talking about Europe, but also about the collective West as a whole. When Russians face discrimination, all too often, they receive a formal reply, maybe not a formal investigation, but some kind of an attention, a little attention to what is happening. But at times it is simply ignored. By the way, some of the compatriots have some discussions where they are told, indeed, there is a violation in a certain NATO country. You became a victim to criminal activities of culprits, but you do understand the political context of these developments. Wait a second. It is the very collective West that always said that law is law. There's nothing above it. That is the foundation of Western democracy and the freedom of everything. At the same time, law should be respected. At the same time, they said that law should not interfere in the economy. I'm not talking about the international law because it is clear to everyone how the West treats the international law. I'm talking about domestic law. If people come to them and they are told, I'm sorry, who are you? What nationality do you belong to? Ethnic group do you belong to? Where do you ethnically come from? And if a person gives a wrong answer in terms of the political situation, then there would be no criminal charges pressed with regard to this incident. And we are taken back to 80 years ago. Western Europe has already faced that when crimes were committed against persons and they were not investigated, they were encouraged because of national grounds. A family was sent to ghetto, business was taken away, they were taken away from the flat and they were insulted. Everything was encouraged and justified by Nazi Germany because these people were representing a wrong nationality. They pinned yellow stars to everything, clothes shops, everything. People were forced to live in ghetto, and it turned out that it was not the worst case scenario because after that there were gas cameras, gas chambers, and that is what we're revolting against. The world has already seen that. It is murderous, it is scary, and that is something that was enshrined as the atrocious crime during the Nuremberg tribunal for the humanity never to repeat it again. Let me emphasize that the work to defend human rights is something that we want to carry on doing. Thank you for this detailed answer. Recently, nuclear fuel was transferred to Akü nuclear power plant in Turkey. France supports the nuclear plant Bakş 2 project that is implemented in Hungary. At the same time, Germany insists that the EU should include civil nuclear energy of Russia into the 11th sanctions package. What is the assessment of the Foreign Ministry with regard to two lines with regard to Russia and Europe? It has become clear long ago that the sanctions war unleashed by the EU turned out to be a failure. Russia does not suffer the expected damage counted upon by the collective West, and they backfire, basically. That is absurd, that is stupid, that is odd, but maybe that's something that they like. The lack of energy sources lead to deindustrialization and growing social and economic problems in Europe. And that is not only our assessment. By the way, we predicted that. That is their own analysis. You can take a look at leading economists of the West. They have already analyzed it in detail. The EU officials are guided by the interests of transatlantic solidarity, but basically they face pressure by Washington. They do not pay heed to real needs of the EU member states, and they are ready to do anything for the sanctions mechanism to carry on, because in the current environment, these Russophobic restrictions turned out to be a domestic policy factor in the EU. That is why, when it comes to putting pressure on Russia, they are ready to follow any suicidal path. That is something beyond reason, logic. Clearly, they are ready to resort to economic banditism. You have heard discussions to this regard, and there is a specific number of cases. Although the EU leadership recognizes that they've already tested everything from their toolbox, Brussels is still thinking about imposing even more restrictions for our country to face dire consequences. I think that we see here economic duality of Brussels. They suffer, they feel pain. At the same time, they are waiting for something to come up to strike us most. At the same time, they suffer the most. There's a saying that is used usually: I will do everything for the detriment of another, even at my own loss. I believe that that's what they are doing. Moving on to the nuclear energy. Currently, the EU Russophobes are trying to cover nuclear energy of Russia in their sanctions. I would like to urge and to make an appeal to the voice of reason. Nuclear energy is the key element of the energy security of a number of states of this specific organization, the European Union. Thus, the European Union at large. Regrettably, certain circles in the EU try to politicize this area of energy cooperation with our country. Allegedly, they try to give more access to market to American sources. Clearly, by doing so, Brussels will damage itself if it introduces restrictions to the civil nuclear energy. At risk is not only the access to nuclear energy, but also the nuclear security of nuclear power plants in European countries. Thank you. And the last question. Russia has ratified a protocol on interaction of the CSTO member states and biological security. Previously, the Russian MOD briefed us on the biolabs of American military agency at the post-Soviet space. What neighboring countries have their biolabs controlled by the US, and what measures are to be taken in this regard? Ensuring biological security over the past years has become especially important in the international agenda, and you know why. Since when it comes to biological security, Washington turned matters of biological insecurity or biological danger The CSTO member states made a decision to prioritize this matter. On the 28th of April, President Putin signed law on ratification of the protocol. By the way, last year, the CSTO Committee of Secretaries established the Coordination Council that is in charge of all the biosecurity matters. The first session took place on the 15th of December last year in St. Petersburg, and the next meeting is scheduled for July in Minsk. Russia seeks to develop in-depth cooperation within the CSTO in this area, and we are ready to comprehensively bring about the efficient functioning of this entity. We prioritize biological security within the CSTO because there are numerous dangerous and uncontrolled biological activities by the US in various parts of the globe, including at the post-Soviet space. The US activities are of serious concern when it comes to implementing Convention on Biological and Toxic Weapons. The launch of the special military operation revealed new facts of how Pentagon and other agencies of the US in Ukraine, which they are not neighboring, which is on the other side of the earth, and it became the test range for their experiments with very dangerous toxins.
And it was covered by the Health Ministry of Ukraine, but actually those were Pentagon programs and the Ukrainian ministry itself. For some years worked not only under the auspices, but under the leadership of a person sent from North America with their citizenship, their passport, their work experience. Under the coverage of Center Epidemiological Assistance, they modernized and built biolaboratories in other countries, among others in former Soviet Union states. And it was contrary to the protocol of the convention, the Biological and Toxin Weapons Convention. And it is impossible to control the compliance of those sites in accordance with that convention. And we repeatedly stated the necessity to make this work transparent. And where they opened those laboratories, they said, of course, we can even organize the guided tour for you. But it's not regarding a guided tour. There is a difference between a tour and an inspection. It was only about visiting some reception area. But actually, yes, it was reception, where guests are registered and not allowed to go somewhere beyond. The investigations carried out by the US can be contrary to the international security, and one of the facts revealed is the acts contrary to the Biological and Toxin Weapons Conventions on the territory of Ukraine, and there is proof that the components of biological weapons were developed in Ukraine. It is published in our report on biolaboratories in Ukraine. And this information, at first it was surprising for them, and even the high-ranking American representatives did not deny such activities. And after that, after they realized the scale, the consequences how to get out of this situation. And at first they did not find any words to justify them. They just admitted that they were carrying out such work. And many questions to Washington regarding those activities, as you know, remain without any reaction, any appropriate reaction, and all that requires solution. We will continue our work at the Profile International platform, mostly within the framework of the BTWC, regarding the claims we have and the situation in Ukraine reiterates the necessity to adhere to the BTWC, and the inspections should be carried out in the established framework with understandable results. It's not a guided tour. It's not what they want to show to you. It's not what you must see, what has been demonstrated to you. It's an inspection, it's control. And we intend to carry out the step-by-step work with the member states and for the states to adhere to the convention, and we will seek further strengthening of the BTWC. We hold regular consultations and are in contact with the partners in the CSTO. Memorandums of understanding have been signed, and their implementation is an impetus to security of our countries and our friendly relations, and contributes to cooperation in this sphere. It's a necessary sphere for cooperation, for real practical cooperation. And I do not want journalists, experts, political scientists to see in this just a number of cliches of international lexicology. It's not about cliches. The year that brought to us the pandemics, COVID-19, has shown what life can be and the challenges the humanity can face. Just in 1 second, all the challenges. We thought that we know so much, and in a couple of weeks, the whole world is totally paralyzed because it does not know how to react and what it is dealing with. We now face those consequences. And the more concrete is the attitude of those in charge of those problems, the less it is just a terminology game, just rewriting some papers, some theory, the better it will be. And by the way, is it all with you? No more questions? I would like to come back to the RIA Novosti question regarding the meeting of Syria, Turkey, Iran, and of course Russia. The meeting is being prepared, but it is early to cite a date of when it will be conducted and where. If that is all, is a newsroom with us. Yes, hello, Ms. Zakharova. That's news.ru information portal. Regarding the reparations by Poland from Germany, they stated that they could require reparations from Russia, and the Polish authorities could start a dialogue on this issue with President Vladimir Putin. What is the attitude of Moscow to such plans? I would like just to say one word. Maybe it will be the end of the game. Thank you very much. Another question, has Vatican communicated a peace initiative to the Russian side? Has the Pope mentioned some initiative? No, as of today, the Russian side has not received any initiatives from Vatican, no proposals of the settlement of the Ukraine crisis. We do not have anything like that. We do not have any details of Pope Francis mentioned in the media, But the Holy See has repeatedly expressed readiness to provide mediation services. We all have seen that, we have read that. From the start of the special military operations, we maintained contact with the Holy See, and we're sure that the Vatican is well aware of our position. And regarding the peace process in Ukraine, maybe some people still remain who do not know that Zelensky forbade to himself to conduct peaceful negotiations with our country and to his regime. He has relevant legislation in place, and it is not surprising in connection with those criminals. And you know very well, the only thing that the Bankowa is guided by are the orders of their Washington masters who are interested in hostilities, and they speak about that directly in Pentagon, in the State Department, the legislative authorities, and also some public figures, not all of them, but those who express some reasonable ideas are switched off of that discussion. You know what happens with journalists there. They're just fired, they're just not broadcast. And you know what the economists face, those who try to present some reasonable forecasts are threatened. They threaten to block their accounts. They get strikes. They get notifications, and it's refusal by the Kiev regime of any peaceful negotiations way. And the Vatican partners are well aware of that, and they should be aware of that, because I would like to highlight once more, there are still people who make conclusions about the situation in Ukraine, and they do not know that Zelensky forbade to himself and to his regime any negotiations with our country. Thank you. If that's all with you, thank you. Is Moscow Baku with us? Yes, hello, Ms. Zakharova. As we know, on the platform of the United States, with the mediatorship of the U.S. Secretary of State, it is the third day of the negotiations. It was has been announced that it will be several days. How can you comment on that? On the foreign ministers meeting and the American mediatorship. First of all, those negotiations take place without participation of Russia, and the process of what is happening there, it should be learned from the participants in those negotiations directly. And as soon as there are statements, as soon as every party makes a statement, some impression will be possible